Oliver Stone's new biopic, Snowden, is out, and Sam Machkovech from Ars Technica is here with his review. Welcome, Sam.
Hello, everyone. How's it going?
It's going well. So I've heard that Snowden doesn't fare much better than the most recent Jobs biopic, that it sort of contains some forced and trite imagery, like things like a Rubik's Cube used to signify genius, for example. What did you think?
Honestly, I went into this with pretty low expectations. A biopic about something that's still ongoing is sort of an interesting subject choice. There was clearly a race to get a Snowden movie out. I actually got to talk to Mr. Stone today on Skype, of all things. Oh, nice. He did not have duct tape over his camera on his device, although I think he was actually borrowing somebody else's, but that's neither here nor there. And I found it very interesting because there was a report about the crazy making of this movie that went live at the New York Times either yesterday or the day before. Conveniently, he said, I haven't read it, didn't comment on it. I heartily recommend you look it up. It's nuts, but it sounds like a lot of weird stuff happened to get this movie made. One thing was that they bought the rights to a script or a book that was written by a Russian lawyer who represents Snowden overseas. And this movie doesn't actually use any of that book, Oliver Stone told me, because basically at the 11th hour, he managed to get Snowden, he says, to come on board and essentially not be a major advisor, but to simply give little bits of here and there checks. And as a result, this is actually a relatively accurate portrayal with a lot of weird dramatization. It's really hard to explain how that balance plays out without seeing it, because I feel like at every turn you have something that actually makes logical sense, that follows the normal timeline of things that happened, and then you run into something where there's a character named after somebody in 1984 who's like a member of the CIA, as if that couldn't be more like right on the nose in terms of what the movie is trying to say about our current surveillance state, as it were. But ultimately, I really found myself liking the movie more than I expected for one reason. Joseph Gordon-Levitt, wow, I don't know words today. Joseph Gordon-Levitt playing Edward Snowden is unbelievable. Best Actor of the Year nominee, hands down, because through all of this dramatic, cheesy chaos. Remember, Nicolas Cage shows up within the first 15 minutes. That gives you any sort of compass of how kind of odd this movie can get.
Any really big explosions behind Nicolas Cage when he's there?
No, but he does absolutely appear at the end of the movie in like a cheesy 80s kind of way out of nowhere. It's like the laughter in the press screening was just riotous just at that moment. It certainly was not meant to be that way. But every time things get cheesy, Gordon-Levitt really nails making this very subtle, subdued character work. He never pounds on a desk, starts shouting about freedom and about feeling like his faith in the system's been fractured. It's so much show don't tell, which is sort of a cheesy way of putting it. But he really is given room to show what his experience was like, to let the different narrative beats play out in a way that let him not act all over dramatic. He never really shouts anything major. In fact, the most declarative things he ends up saying are usually near the beginning of the movie about he's given a polygraph test as he starts training for the CIA, and they ask, is America the greatest country on the earth? And he says yes, and he doesn't phase. And a lot of other things he says about duty, about caring about the country, about coming from a family of service with a father and a grandfather who'd worked for the FBI and for the Coast Guard. Things like that. So he's really set up as sort of a conservative, almost libertarian in certain parts of the beginning. But, duty ends up being the leading call for him. And that plays out in this very interesting way because he's facing these programs while going through the NSA. There's a little bit of dramatization. There's actually on the screen right now, they show this sort of hipster hacker who's chewing on gum and is calling Snowden Snow White and all this sort of cheesiness. And so that sort of stuff, every turn of the movie, something tries to derail the core issue of what this person, Edward Snowden, went through in order to disclose, and what he found, what he disclosed, how he did it, and the relationship and health that it cost him in order to do so. movie centers on Snowden in a way that I think is just very striking and interesting. I don't know that I would say it's like best film of the year or must see. I don't think that it illuminates things that we as Snowden followers didn't already know. Actually, interestingly, it uses some plot beats that you might have learned about if you had read Ars Technica's forums, where Edward Snowden was a longtime member. We had a report come up a couple of years ago when the story broke about the nickname of his that had been uncovered, matching up perfectly with an account at Ars Technica talking about things like breaking his legs during army training, things like that. And those plot beats are in the movie, which, you know, that how I've never worked somewhere where I've been able to say something like that. So all in all, there is both more cheese and less cheese than I expected. Actually, technology is treated in a very subtle way. You get no faked GUIs. You get nothing that looks like a crappy CSI Miami sort of thing, where they show, you know, enhance and a cheap fake computer screen. Right. Everything is like a real crappy telnet interface. There's actually one point where they use this awful GUI that looks like something from Windows 3.1. That's a heat map, the entire internet surveillance pattern. And I looked at it and I said, that looks like actual military software in terms of being, you know, form definite or a function definitely over form, excuse me. So there's lots of different technology things that are nailed. There's lots of things about Snowden himself that are nailed. I'm sorry, I am kind of rambling because it is an Oliver Stone movie, and I feel like to really appreciate an Oliver Stone movie is to ramble through the emotional beats and the hitting over your head and really on the nose stuff. But yeah. Joseph Gordon-Levitt, from what it sounds like, especially in the New York Times piece, it sounds like he really fought to turn down the Snowden specific stuff, the things he said and the way he acts. That comes through. If he doesn't win an Oscar, then that will mean there was an even better performance than this, and that it would be good for filmgoers. So that, on that reason alone, this is a much better movie than I expected. And bravo, surprise, bravo to Oliver Stone for pulling this off.
Yeah, I think my only question for you on this was whether Oliver Stone was restrained at all, but I know that that's a silly question because it's not Oliver Stone's way.
Yeah.
So this week, the House Intelligence Committee came out with a report on Snowden's disclosures. How did the movie compare with that report in terms of accuracy on either side?
So if you go to Edward Snowden's Twitter account, he specifically cites scenes in the movie that are referenced in the House report. There's certain attempts by the House committee to discredit, to say that Snowden was sort of an overclaimer and a falsifier, and they talked about certain things, and he said, you can watch the movie. That exact thing that they're talking about, its context is laid out in the movie. He's like, that, if anything, it seems to, that the way that document reads, if you combine that with what Snowden says, is good advertising for this movie, because it does, after reading that and then seeing what Snowden said and remembering those scenes, I go, that makes sense. That makes sense, the way that the condemnations that they issue are very brief in that report, and Snowden connects those dots in a way. So I don't know that necessarily he's answered to every single one of those things. I think that the conversation is going to continue for some time about, was he a traitor? Did he do the right thing in terms of how he disclosed all these files? Now, remember, one thing that both this film and the documentary Citizen 4 really stressed was that they didn't have very much time once Snowden exposed himself. Once he said, I am this person, I am with the NSA or contract with the NSA, here are the files. At that point, the clock was ticking. So the big issue that especially our commenters at Ars Technica have talked about is, did he disclose responsibly? It was a lot of data that was dumped. Some of those files eventually did get outside of Glenn Greenwald's grasp, and we're not sure exactly what damage that did or didn't do. But ultimately, in terms of him wanting to get information out and to do so as a quote-unquote patriot, this film does try to make that case. I know Oliver Stone, when I was talking to him, he made a point of, I've never heard of a spy who does stuff like this without seeking a paycheck. Snowden wasn't looking for a paycheck. You can see every single thing he's done. He's been very much above the board ever since exposing himself. There hasn't been this great paper trail of money or of fame or of specific communication with Russians or Chinese. So that doesn't. There's not going to be a really solid answer to things until somebody sets a path for either Snowden's pardon or for Snowden to get a public trial, the kind where everything will be out in the open, no like hidden suppressed trial. I don't see either of those things happening anytime soon based on that House report, however. Yeah. But certainly if enough people see this film and there are enough calls out there, who knows what Obama could do before the end of his lame duck term. But I don't see that carpet has been rolled out and I certainly don't think that this film is going to put anything over the top. I don't see anyone seeing this movie in our intelligence groups, in our military group, and saying, oh, now I get it. I think everybody who's involved with things kind of knows what the stakes were and has been acting accordingly.
I don't know. Oliver Stone has a lot of pull. Not really.
Well, what about Citizen 4, the documentary? Do you recommend people watch that first before they see, or is it basically you don't need to watch that anymore now that the Stone movie is out?
Oh, if you tell me which one to see, I will always say Citizen 4 because I think that is such a landmark of the entire world. That is such an internationally fascinating moment, captured in a really interesting way, really tells a lot of stories at once. It sets a lot of the context that I think the Snowden film also happens to do, because it pulls in footage of other people talking about metadata accumulation and degrees of separation from suspects that have been targeted by these collection agencies. The Snowden film, I think, is for people who would never really watch a documentary. I would hand this movie to my mother, for example. My mother, my father, other family members who wouldn't necessarily sit down with a documentary and say, if you get out of this movie and don't put duct taped over your webcam on your laptop, then I will be shocked. I think it does a really good job of telling that sort of story and of painting Snowden in a clearly biased but certainly convincing way of patriotism being at least some aspect of why he did what he did.